The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Thornwood Concert Hall, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Catherine wiped down the last table in the lobby cafe, her movements practiced and efficient after 15 years of doing the same routine. At 52, she had the kind of face that people rarely notice pleasant. Unremarkable, framed by graying hair she kept tied back in a simple bun. Her hands, though, told a different story. They were worn and calloused from years of work, but there was something graceful about the way she moved them. Even when doing something as simple as cleaning tables, this was her world now. The concert hall had become as familiar to her as her own small apartment across town. She knew every corner, every creaky floorboard backstage, every spot where the acoustics made the music sound just a bit more magical. The musicians who performed here came and went like seasons, some kind, some indifferent, some so caught up in their own brilliance they barely saw the people who kept the building running. Today was going to be busy. Victor Ashford was performing tonight, and whenever Victor came to town, everything had to be perfect. Catherine had seen his picture in the newspapers, read the glowing reviews, heard the buzz from patrons who paid hundreds of dollars just to sit in the balcony. He was the kind of pianist people traveled across states to hear, the kind whose recordings sold out within hours of release. She heard him before she saw him. His voice carried across the lobby, rich and confident, holding court with a small group of people who hung on his every word. Catherine glanced up from her work and saw him standing near the main entrance, kepley dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his early 40s, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of a life lived entirely in spotlights and 5-star hotels. Around him clustered his manager, 2 assistants, and a woman with a notebook who Catherine recognized as a music journalist from one of the major papers. They were discussing his upcoming tours, his recent recording, the possibility of a performance at Carnegie Hall. Victor spoke with animated gestures, his hands cutting through the air as if conducting an invisible orchestra. Catherine went back to her work, but she couldn't help overhearing snippets of the conversation. Victor was talking about the decline of classical music appreciation, about how most people these days couldn't tell the difference between Mozart and movie soundtracks. His tone was playful, but carried an edge of genuine disdain. The problem, he was saying, is that everyone thinks they understand music just because they have ears. But there's a difference between hearing and truly listening, between appreciating and understanding. Most people, he paused for effect, simply lack the education, the refinement, to grasp what makes great music great. One of his assistants laughed a bit too enthusiastically. The journalist scribbled notes. Catherine felt her jaw tighten slightly, but kept her expression neutral. She'd heard this kind of talk before from other performers, though usually not quite so boldly stated. Take the staff here, for instance, Victor continued. And Catherine felt her stomach drop as she realized he was gesturing vaguely in her direction. Perfectly nice people, I'm sure. But do you think they could tell you the difference between Chopin and Liszt? Between a sonata and a symphony? They hear the music through these walls night after night, but it's just noise to them. Pleasant background noise, perhaps, but nothing more. Catherine kept wiping the same spot on the table, willing herself to become invisible. This wasn't the first time she'd been on the receiving end of such dismissiveness, and it wouldn't be the last. The trick was to not let it show, to not give them the satisfaction of knowing their words landed. But Victor wasn't done. Perhaps encouraged by his audience's laughter, or perhaps just bored and looking for entertainment, he raised his voice slightly. You there? Yes, you with the cloth. Catherine looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no malice in them exactly, just a kind of thoughtless amusement, as if she were a prop in a performance rather than a person. Do you even know what a Steinway is? He asked, smiling at his entourage as if they were all in on the joke. For a moment, Catherine considered pretending she hadn't heard, but something in his casual cruelty, in the way his companions were already beginning to smirk, made her straighten her spine and walk closer. Sir, she said quietly. It's a piano. German-American company, founded in 1853, known for their concert grands. Victor's eyebrows rose slightly, though whether from surprise or increased amusement, Catherine couldn't tell. Well, someone's been reading the brochures. But reading about pianos and playing them are two very different things, wouldn't you say? He turned to his audience, warming to his theme. I'd wager you've never touched a piano in your life, have you? Not really. Maybe plinked around with chopsticks as a child, but nothing more. Catherine said nothing. Her hands, holding the damp cloth, were steady.
Tell you what,
Victor said suddenly, as if struck by inspiration. I'm feeling generous today. Before tonight's performance, I'll give you a chance. Come play my piano. Right here, right now. Show us what you've got. Give us a little concert. The journalist's pen stopped moving. The assistants exchanged glances. The manager looked uncomfortable, starting to say something about the piano being prepared for the evening performance. But Victor waved him off. Oh, come now. It won't hurt anything. Unless he looked back at Catherine with a challenging smile. You're afraid? I promise not to judge too harshly. We all have to start somewhere, right? The lobby had gone quiet. Other staff members who had been working nearby had stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. Everyone expected Catherine to politely decline, to mumble something about needing to get back to work, to escape this uncomfortable moment with whatever dignity she could salvage. Catherine folded the cloth carefully, setting it down on the table. She untied her apron, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Then she looked directly at Victor Ashford, at this man who had built a career on being the best, on standing above others, on making beautiful things that moved thousands of people to tears. All right, she said simply. I accept. The words hung in the air like the sustained note of a bell. Victor's smile froze for just a fraction of a second before returning, broader now, but somehow less certain. He had expected refusal. He had expected embarrassment. What he hadn't expected was acceptance. Wonderful, he said, recovering quickly, his voice booming with theatrical enthusiasm. A woman of courage. This should be interesting indeed. Come, come, everyone to the concert hall. Let's give our brave volunteer an audience worthy of her debut. He swept toward the concert hall doors, his entourage following. Catherine walked behind them, her sensible work shoes quiet on the carpet. Behind her, she heard whispers from her co-workers. Concern, confusion, second-hand embarrassment. Someone whispered that she should have just said no, that this was only going to end badly. But Catherine kept walking, following the famous pianist through the doors, into the vast emptiness of the concert hall, toward the gleaming black Steinway that waited on stage like an old friend she hadn't seen in far too long. The concert hall felt different when it was empty. Catherine had cleaned these aisles hundreds of times, had vacuumed between these velvet seats, had polished the brass railings that curved along the balconies, but she had never walked down the center aisle like this, toward the stage, with people watching her every step. The hall could seat almost 2,000 people. Right now, there were maybe 10 scattered in the front rows. Victor had settled himself in the center seat, fourth row back. The position critics usually chose because it offered the best acoustics. His manager sat beside him, checking his phone nervously. The journalist had taken a seat at the end of the row, her notebook open, pen ready. A few of Catherine's co-workers had slipped in through the side doors, unable to resist witnessing whatever was about to happen. Catherine's heart was beating faster than she wanted to admit. She could feel it pounding in her chest, in her throat, in her fingertips. How many years had it been since she'd felt this particular flutter of nervousness? 20 years? 25. Back when performance anxiety was as familiar to her as breathing? When the thought of playing for others filled her with equal parts terror and joy. The stage lights were already on, warm and bright, positioned to illuminate whoever sat at the piano. The Steinway Model D Concert Grand sat center stage, its black lacquer surface reflecting the lights like still water. 9 feet of perfectly crafted instrument, capable of producing sounds so pure they could make grown men weep. Catherine had watched it being tuned earlier that week, had seen the technician spend 3 hours making microscopic adjustments to ensure every note would ring true. She climbed the stage steps slowly, her legs steadier than she expected. The stage felt huge from up here, even bigger than it looked from the audience. The empty seats stretched back into shadow, rising tier after tier until they disappeared in darkness near the ceiling. In a few hours, all those seats would be filled with people in evening wear, clutching programs waiting to hear Victor Ashford demonstrate his mastery. But right now, the stage belonged to her. "Whenever you're ready," Victor called out, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. There was still amusement in his tone, but Catherine detected something else now too. Curiosity, maybe? Or perhaps just impatience to get this over with so he could return to his pre-performance routine. Catherine approached the piano bench. She ran her hand along the edge of the piano, feeling the smooth coolness of the lacquer under her palm. The instrument was beautiful, maintained with obvious care and attention. She could smell the faint scent of wood polish and that indefinable something that all pianos had, wood and metal, and felt hammers and the ghost of 1,000 melodies. She sat down on the bench and immediately adjusted its height, spinning the knob beneath the seat until it was exactly right. Her hands knew the proper position without her having to think about it. Muscle memory from another lifetime, still buried somewhere in her bones. Victor leaned forward slightly in his seat. "Do you need sheet music?" he asked, and there was genuine question in his voice now, not mockery. "I'm sure we can find something simple. Far Elise, perhaps? Everyone knows that one." Catherine shook her head. "No, thank you. I have something in mind." She placed her hands on her lap and looked down at the keys. 88 keys, each one a doorway to a different sound, a different emotion. How many hours had she spent with keyboards like this? Thousands upon thousands. So many that her fingers knew the geography of the piano better than they knew anything else in the world. In the fourth row, Victor's manager whispered something to him. Catherine couldn't hear the words, but she saw Victor shake his head dismissively, settling back to watch. The journalist's pen was poised above her notebook, ready to capture what she clearly expected to be an awkward, embarrassing moment worth a few amusing sentences in her article. Catherine closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Then another. She let her shoulders drop, released the tension she'd been carrying in her neck. This was the moment before every performance. The pocket of stillness where the rest of the world fell away, and there was only the music waiting to be born. Her hands rose to the keyboard and found their positions. Her right foot found the sustain pedal, pressing it down slightly to test its resistance. Everything felt right. Everything felt like coming home. She opened her eyes, looked down at the keys one last time, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated out into the hall, gentle and intimate. It was a piece that required delicacy, control, an understanding of how silence was just as important as sound. Catherine's fingers moved across the keys with familiar confidence, finding each note with precision that came from years of practice that had never quite left her muscle memory. In the fourth row, Victor Ashford's expression changed. The amused smile disappeared. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed in concentration. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, watching Catherine's hands with sudden, intense focus. The music filled the empty hall, each phrase shaped with care and feeling. Catherine wasn't just playing the notes on a page. She was telling a story, painting with sound, creating something that lived and breathed. Her touch was light but assured, bringing out the melody while letting the accompaniment shimmer beneath. It like moonlight on water. The journalist's pen had stopped moving. She sat frozen, mouth slightly open, her prepared snark forgotten as the music washed over her. Victor's manager had put down his phone. The co-workers who had slipped in to watch were standing motionless near the doors. Not wanting to break whatever spell had settled over the room, Catherine lost herself in the music. This was why she had accepted the challenge, she realized. Not to prove anything to Victor, or to embarrass him, or to make some grand statement, but simply because it had been so long since she'd had permission to touch a piano like this. To let herself remember what it felt like to create something beautiful, her fingers danced through the more complex middle section, where the melody climbed and the harmonies grew richer. She shaped each phrase the way she'd been taught decades ago, the way her old teacher, Professor Bennett, had demonstrated. His gnarled hands, still capable of coaxing miracles from ivory and wood. Feel the music, he used to say. Don't just play it. Feel every note as if it's the first time you've ever heard it. The piece moved toward its conclusion, the melody returning like a memory, softer now, more distant. Catherine let the final notes fade into silence slowly, reluctantly, like saying goodbye to an old friend. The last sound hung in the air for a moment, then disappeared into the vast emptiness of the hall. Catherine lifted her hands from the keys and placed them back in her lap. She sat very still, her eyes still on the keyboard, not quite ready to return to the real world yet. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The moment stretched out, fragile as glass. Then from somewhere in the back of the hall, someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then joined by others. It wasn't enthusiastic applause, wasn't the thunderous response a performance like this might normally receive. It was something else. Surprise. Maybe respect. The sound of people who had witnessed something they hadn't expected and weren't. Quite sure how to process it, Catherine stood up from the bench and turned to face the small audience. Victor was on his feet now, but he wasn't clapping. He was just staring at her, his expression unreadable. In all his years of performing, of teaching, of judging competitions, and auditioning students, he had clearly not expected this. Catherine descended the stage steps. Her legs felt slightly shaky now, adrenaline and old emotions flooding through her system. As she reached the bottom step, Victor moved into the aisle, blocking her path. Up close, she could see the confusion in his eyes, the way his confident persona had cracked. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Catherine stood at the bottom of the stage steps, facing Victor. His question hung in the air between them. "Who are you?" As if her performance had transformed her into someone he needed to recognize. Someone who mattered in his world of concert halls and conservatories and sold-out tours. "I'm Catherine Hayes," she said simply. "I work in the cafeteria here. That's not what I mean." Victor took a step closer, his voice low but intense. "Where did you learn to play like that? That wasn't amateur playing? That wasn't someone who took a few lessons as a child. That was..." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "That was real." The journalist had moved closer now, her notebook clutched in her hand, her reporter instincts clearly firing on all cylinders. This was turning into a story, and she knew it. The manager was speaking quietly into his phone, probably alerting someone that they were running behind schedule. Catherine's co-workers remained by the side door, watching with wide eyes. "I trained at the Royal Conservatory," Catherine said quietly. "A long time ago. I graduated in 1995. The silence that followed was different from the one after her performance. This was the silence of people recalculating, reassessing, trying to fit new information into a picture that suddenly made no sense. Victor's manager spoke up, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "The Royal Conservatory? That's one of the top music schools in the country. If you graduated from there, how are you?" He caught himself, but the question was already obvious. "How are you working in a cafeteria? Why aren't you performing?" The journalist asked, her pen already moving across the page. "With training like that, you should be on stage. You should have a career." Catherine felt the weight of all their eyes on her. These were questions she'd stopped asking herself years ago, had buried so deep she almost forgot they existed. But standing here with the piano still warm from her touch, and her heart still racing from the performance, the old feelings came flooding back. "Life doesn't always work out the way you plan," she began, choosing her words carefully. "When I graduated, I had opportunities. There were auditions, competitions, the possibility of touring with a small ensemble. I was excited. I thought I knew exactly how my life would go." She paused, and in that pause 30 years of memory pressed against her chest. "But then my husband got sick. Really sick. Cancer? He was diagnosed 6 months after my graduation. Suddenly, all those auditions and opportunities didn't matter anymore. What mattered was being there for him, taking care of him, figuring out how to pay medical bills that kept piling up." Victor had sat down in the aisle seat, his earlier arrogance completely gone. He was listening now, really listening, in a way Catherine suspected he rarely did. "I thought it would be temporary," Catherine continued. "I thought I'd take a year off, maybe 2, and then get back to it. But cancer doesn't work on convenient timelines. David was sick for 3 years. 3 years of hospitals and treatments and hope and disappointment. I practiced when I could late at night after he'd fallen asleep, but it wasn't the same. You can't maintain performance-level skills when you're running on 4 hours of sleep and constant worry. The journalist was writing furiously now, but her eyes were soft. Even she seemed to understand this was more than just a story. This was someone's life, laid bare. When David died, Catherine's voice was steady but quiet. I was 31 years old. I'd been away from the music world for so long that my contacts had dried up. The people I'd graduated with had moved on, built careers, made names for themselves. I tried to get back into it. I really did. I went to auditions, sent out recordings, reached out to everyone I could think of. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. But the music world doesn't wait for you. There's always someone younger, someone who hasn't had a gap in their resume, someone who didn't disappear for 3 years. I needed to work, needed steady income. And honestly, after everything with David, I was exhausted. Emotionally, physically, in every way. The thought of fighting my way back into a career that might never materialize felt impossible. So you just gave up? Victor's voice wasn't accusatory. It was genuinely confused, as if he couldn't fathom making that choice. I survived, Catherine corrected gently. I found a job that paid the bills. In this job, she gestured around the concert hall, it lets me be near music. I hear every performance. I know the schedule better than most of the performers do. When I clean the hall after shows, I can still feel the music in the air, like it's soaked into the walls. It's not the same as performing, but it's something. Victor stood up slowly, running a hand through his hair. He looked shaken, like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. I had no idea, he said. When I challenged you, when I made those comments, I thought he stopped. It doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong. Couldn't have known, Catherine said, and she meant it. There was no anger in her voice, no desire to make him feel worse than he clearly already did. I'm not upset about the challenge. In a way, I'm grateful for it. It's been years since I played like that. Really played. I forgot how good it feels. The manager checked his watch nervously. Mr. Ashford, we really need to start your rehearsal. The technical crew will be here soon. And you wanted to check the acoustics before in a minute, Victor said, his eyes still on Catherine. How often do you play? Do you have a piano at home? Catherine shook her head. No room for one in my apartment. And honestly, I couldn't afford one even if I had space. I haven't played regularly in over 20 years. Sometimes late at night when the hall is empty, I'll come in here and play for a few minutes. The night security guard, Robert, he pretends not to notice. But it's rare. Maybe a handful of times a year. That's criminal, Victor said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice now. Someone with your skill, your understanding of music, should be playing every day. Should be teaching at least, if not performing. Should is a luxury not everyone can afford, Catherine replied. There was no bitterness in her words, just simple truth. I made the choices I had to make. I don't regret them. David needed me, and I was there for him. That matters more than any concert I might have given. The journalist spoke up, her voice careful. Do you ever wonder what might have been? If circumstances had been different? Catherine thought about it for a moment. Sometimes, she admitted. Late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about the performances I never gave. The students I never taught, the recordings that were never made. But then, I remembered David's hand in mine during those last days, and the gratitude in his eyes that I was there. Would I trade those moments for a career? No. Never. She looked around the concert hall, at the familiar space that had become her world. Besides, I've heard some of the greatest musicians in the world perform on this stage. I've watched them, learned from them, even if they never knew I was paying attention. That's worth something too. Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The performance was gone, the carefully maintained persona of the brilliant artist. What remained was just a man confronted with his own assumptions and finding them wanting. I'm sorry, he said. Not just for the challenge, but for everything I said before. About people not understanding music. about staff members not being able to appreciate what happens here. I was wrong. Clearly, deeply wrong. Catherine nodded, accepting the apology with grace. We all make assumptions. The trick is being willing to change them when we learn better. The manager cleared his throat again, more insistently this time. Victor glanced back at him, then at the stage, then back at Catherine. Something was working behind his eyes, an idea forming. Wait here, he said suddenly. Don't leave yet, please. I need to think about something, before Catherine could respond. He turned and strode back toward the stage, already pulling out his phone. His mind clearly racing with possibilities that Catherine couldn't begin to guess. Catherine stood in the aisle, uncertain whether to stay or go. Victor had disappeared backstage, still talking rapidly into his phone. His manager looked torn between following him and maintaining some semblance of the carefully planned schedule. The journalist was typing notes into her phone now, her notebook forgotten. Catherine's co-workers exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. You should probably get back to work, one of them called out softly. Linda's going to wonder where you went. Catherine nodded, but something kept her feet planted where they were. Victor had asked her to wait, and despite everything, despite the awkwardness of the situation, she was curious about what he was thinking. The man who had challenged her out of arrogance seemed to have transformed into someone else entirely in the span of 30 minutes. Victor reappeared from backstage, walking quickly, his phone still in his hand. Behind him came Robert, the night security guard Catherine had mentioned earlier. Robert caught her eye and gave her a small, knowing smile. So he had known all along about her late-night visits to the piano. The thought warmed her. Catherine, Victor said, slightly out of breath, I want to propose something to you, and I need you to hear me out before you say no. I'm listening, Catherine said cautiously. Tonight's performance, Victor began, then paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I'm scheduled to play a full program. 2 hours of solo work. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy. It's the same program I've been touring with for 6 months. It's good. It's polished. It's exactly what everyone expects from me. He looked at her intently. But I want to change it. I want you to play with me. Got duet. Something simple but beautiful. We'd have a few hours to rehearse, to get the timing right. I know it's sudden. I know it's crazy. But no, Catherine said immediately. Victor blinked. Just like that? You won't even consider it. Mr. Ashford, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't. I haven't performed in front of an audience in decades. I just played one piece alone, for 10 people. What you're suggesting is completely different. There will be 2,000 people out there tonight. Critics, recording devices. This is your reputation on the line. Let me worry about my reputation, Victor said. Listen, I know what I saw just now. That wasn't someone who used to be good. That was someone who still is good. The skill is still there, the musicality, the understanding, all of it. Catherine shook her head. You're not thinking clearly. You're feeling guilty about what happened, about the challenge, and you're trying to make up for it. But this isn't the way. You're right that I feel guilty, Victor admitted. I should feel guilty. But that's not why I'm asking. I'm asking because in 20 years of performing, I've played with hundreds of musicians. Some of them were technically perfect. Some of them were famous. But very few of them had what you just showed me on that stage. Heart. Real. Genuine feeling. Music that comes from somewhere deeper than just fingers on keys. The journalist had stopped typing and was watching the exchange with fascination. Even Victor's manager had forgotten to check his watch. I'm honored, Catherine said carefully. Truly I am. But performing isn't just about being able to play well. It's about preparation, about confidence, about being ready. I'm not ready. When will you be ready? Victor asked, his voice gentle now. Next year. 5 years from now? Never? Catherine, I don't know your whole story. I know enough to understand that you've spent 30 years telling yourself that the performing part of your life is over. What if it doesn't have to be? Catherine felt something crack inside her chest, a wall she'd built brick by brick over the years. It's not that simple. It never is, Victor agreed. But sometimes, the best moments in life come from saying yes to things that terrify us. I'm not asking you to restart your career. I'm not asking you to commit to anything beyond tonight. Just one piece. One duet. That's all. What piece? Catherine found herself asking, even though part of her knew she should walk away right now. Victor's face lit up. Schubert's Fantasia in F minor. Do you know it? Catherine's breath caught. She knew it. She had performed it once, years ago, with another student at a conservatory recital. It was a beautiful piece, challenging but not impossible, requiring both players to work in perfect harmony. The memory of it was still vivid in her mind. I know it, she said quietly, then say yes. Victor's eyes were earnest now, all pretense gone. Give yourself this gift. Not for me, not for the audience, but for you. Let yourself remember what it feels like to perform, to share music with people who will appreciate it. You've earned that right. Catherine looked around the concert hall. This space had been her world for 15 years, but always from the outside looking in. She'd watched others take the stage, had cleaned up after their triumphs and their failures, had listened to music through walls and from the shadows. What would it feel like to be the one on stage, to be the one creating the music, instead of just witnessing it? I don't have anything to wear, she said, and even as the words left her mouth, she realized she was making excuses because she was afraid. We'll figure that out, Victor said quickly. My assistant can help. We're about the same height. I haven't rehearsed with another person in decades. What if I mess up your timing? Then we'll adjust. That's what rehearsal is for. What if I freeze up there? What if I can't do it when the audience is watching? Then we stop and I finish the program alone. But Catherine, Victor's voice softened. What if you don't freeze? What if it's exactly what you need? Catherine closed her eyes. She could hear her late husband David's voice in her memory from one of their last conversations. Don't forget who you were before all this, he'd said, his hand weak in hers. Promise me you won't forget the music. She'd promised, but she'd broken that promise, hadn't she? She'd let the music become something she experienced secondhand, something she observed rather than lived. Okay, she whispered, then louder. Okay, yes, I'll do it. Victor's face broke into a genuine smile. Not the practiced performer's smile she'd seen earlier, but something real and warm. Thank you. You won't regret this. I might, Catherine said, but she was smiling too, a nervous, trembling smile that felt strange on her face. I very well might regret this. The next few hours passed in a blur. Victor cleared the hall for a private rehearsal. He pulled up the music for Schubert's Fantasia on a tablet, even though Catherine found she didn't need it. The notes came back to her as if she'd played the piece yesterday, instead of 30 years ago. They worked through the sections slowly at first. Victor was patient, more patient than Catherine expected. When she fumbled a passage, he didn't criticize. Instead, he talked through the phrasing, demonstrated his part, adjusted his tempo to match hers. They were finding their rhythm together, learning each other's musical language. You rush slightly here, he pointed out during one run-through. Just a fraction of a second, but it throws off the next entrance. You're right, Catherine said, trying it again. Better? Perfect. By the time they'd worked through the entire piece twice, Catherine's fingers ached in a way they hadn't in years. Good ache. The kind that came from real work, from pushing herself. Her mind felt clearer too, focused in a way it rarely was anymore. Victor's assistant had brought several dress options. Catherine changed in a small dressing room backstage, settling on a simple but elegant dark blue gown that fit surprisingly well. Looking at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not the cafeteria worker in her practical uniform, but someone else. Someone who belonged on a stage. There was a knock on the door. 15 minutes, someone called. Catherine's hands started shaking. 15 minutes until the hall would fill with people. 15 minutes until she would walk out onto that stage, not to clean it or admire it from a distance, but to perform on it. The reality of what she'd agreed to hit her all at once. Another knock. Catherine, it's Victor. Can I come in? She opened the door. Victor stood there in his performance tuxedo, looking every inch the professional musician he was. But his expression was kind, understanding. He asked. Third and fourth thoughts, too, Catherine admitted. That's normal. I still get nervous before performances, and I do this for a living. He paused. Listen, once we're out there, just focus on the music. Not the audience, not the critics, not anything except the piano and the piece we're creating together. Can you do that? Catherine took a deep breath. I can try. It's all anyone can do, Victor said. Then, more quietly, thank you for saying yes. I think we both needed this. From somewhere in the building, Catherine could hear the murmur of arriving audience members, the shuffle of feet, the rustle of programs. The concert hall was coming to life, filling with people who had come expecting one thing, would get something entirely different. She thought of David again, of his last words to her about not forgetting the music. She thought of all the years she'd spent on the sidelines, watching others live the life she'd once dreamed of. And she thought of the choice she was making right now, in this moment, to step back into that light, even if just for one night. Let's do this, she said, and followed Victor toward the stage. The stage lights were brighter than Catherine remembered. Hotter, too. She stood in the wings, hidden behind the heavy velvet curtain, watching as the audience settled into their seats. The hall was packed. Every seat filled, people standing in the back, the balcony sections crowded with faces. She couldn't make out from this distance. Her heart hammered so hard she wondered if the people nearby could hear it. Her hands felt cold despite the warmth of the lights. She flexed her fingers, trying to keep them loose, trying to remember everything she'd practiced over the past few hours. Victor stood beside her, calm and collected in a way that came from thousands of performances. But when he glanced at her, she saw understanding in his eyes. He knew what this cost her, this leap back into something she'd left behind so long ago. The house manager's going to make an announcement, Victor said quietly, explaining the change to the program, giving people the option to leave if they want their money back. Catherine's stomach dropped. People are going to leave? Maybe a few. But most will stay. They're curious now. That journalist published her article online an hour ago. It's already been shared thousands of times. People know something unusual is happening tonight. Catherine hadn't thought about that. Hadn't considered that her story would already be out there, spreading across social media, turning this private moment into something public. The thought made her feel exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. The house lights dimmed slightly, and a man in a suit walked onto the stage. The audience quieted immediately, programs rustling to a stop. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, the manager's voice carried clearly through the hall. Before we begin tonight's performance, Mr. Ashford has asked me to inform you of a change to the program. Instead of a solo recital, this evening will feature a special duet performance of Schubert's Fantasia in F minor, followed by Mr. Ashford's solo work. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Catherine could hear the confusion, the surprise. Mr. Ashford will be joined by Catherine Hayes, conservatory graduate who has graciously agreed to perform with him this evening. We hope you'll welcome this unexpected addition to tonight's program. The manager left the stage. The murmuring grew louder. Catherine caught fragments of conversation from the nearest seats. Who is she? Never heard of her? Is this some kind of publicity stunt? Ready? Victor asked, offering her his arm. Catherine's mouth was dry. Not even a little bit. Good. That means you care. Come on. They walked out onto the stage together. The applause was polite but confused, scattered, uncertain. Catherine could feel 2,000 pairs of eyes on her, examining her, wondering who this unknown woman was and why she was sharing the stage with Victor Ashford. The two pianos had been positioned at angles, allowing the performers to see each other. Catherine walked to hers, her legs somehow still working, despite feeling like they might give out at any moment. She sat down, adjusted the bench the way she had during rehearsal, and placed her hands in her lap. Victor settled at his piano. He caught her eye and nodded once, a small gesture of encouragement. Then he lifted his hands to the keyboard. The opening notes filled the hall, Victor's part establishing the theme. Catherine counted the measures in her head, feeling the rhythm, waiting for her entrance. This was it. The moment she'd walked away from 30 years ago. The moment she'd convinced herself would never come again. Her hands rose to the keys. she began to play. The first few measures were terrifying. Her fingers felt stiff, mechanical, her mind screaming at her that everyone could hear how nervous she was. But then something shifted. The music began to take over, pushing aside the fear, filling the space where anxiety had been with something else. Something that felt like coming home. Victor's part wove around hers, their melodies intertwining and separating, dancing around each other in the way Schubert had intended. Catherine found herself relaxing into the music, trusting her preparation, trusting her muscle memory, trusting the years of training that had never quite left her. The audience had gone completely silent. Not the restless silence of people waiting for something to be over, but the profound silence of people truly listening. Catherine could feel the shift, could sense the moment when the audience stopped questioning and started experiencing. She and Victor moved through the first movement. Their playing synchronized in a way that surprised even her. They hadn't had time for extensive rehearsal, but somehow they understood each other musically. When Victor pulled back, she came forward. When she rushed slightly, he adjusted without hesitation. They were having a conversation in sound, each responding to the other's choices, creating something that neither could have made alone. The middle section arrived. Technically demanding, emotionally complex. Catherine's fingers flew across the keys, finding notes she hadn't played in decades, executing passages that should have been impossible after so long away. But the music knew her, and she knew the music, and that was enough. She glanced at Victor during a brief rest. He was smiling, actually smiling, his earlier performance facade completely gone. He was enjoying this, she realized. Not as a show or a spectacle, but as a genuine musical collaboration. He nodded at her again as they approached the final section, and she nodded back. They drove toward the climax together. The two pianos building in intensity and volume, the harmonies growing richer and more complex. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them back. Not now. Stay focused. Stay present. The final measures approached. She and Victor moved through them in perfect unity. The music building one last time before resolving into the peaceful conclusion. The last notes hung in the air, delicate and beautiful, then faded into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The hall was utterly still. Then the applause began. It started in the front rows and spread backward like a wave, growing louder and louder until it filled the entire space. People were standing, getting to their feet, clapping with an enthusiasm that went beyond mere politeness. Catherine sat frozen at the piano, unable to quite believe what was happening. Victor stood and gestured to her. She rose on shaky legs and took his offered hand. Together, they bowed to the audience, and the applause grew even louder. Someone in the balcony shouted "Bravo!" and others picked it up. The sound washed over her. Overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once, they left the stage, and Catherine felt her legs finally give way. She sank into a chair in the wings, her whole body trembling. Victor crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You were extraordinary," he said. "Truly extraordinary." Catherine couldn't speak. She just sat there, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Years of loss and longing and suppressed dreams all releasing at once. The stage manager approached. "Mr. Ashford, you're back on in 5 minutes for the solo portion." Victor nodded but didn't move. He stayed with Catherine until her breathing steadied, till the tears stopped, until she could look at him and manage a watery smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Victor said firmly. "Thank you. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Not the applause or the reviews or the recognition, just the pure joy of creating something beautiful with another person." He stood to return to the stage for his solo performance, but Catherine caught his hand. "What happens now?" she asked. Victor smiled. Now you decide. The conservatory where I teach has an opening for a piano instructor. I could make a call. Or maybe you're happy where you are. Maybe this was just for tonight, and that's enough. Either way, Catherine, you proved something important tonight. Not to me, not to that audience, but to yourself. The music never left you. It was just waiting. He returned to the stage for his solo program, and Catherine remained in the wings, listening. The journalist found her during intermission, eager for a follow-up interview. Her co-workers clustered around, full of excitement and questions. The hall manager approached with apologies and an offer to discuss future opportunities. But Catherine barely heard any of it. She was thinking about David, wishing he could have seen this, knowing somehow that he had. She was thinking about the choices she'd made, the years she'd spent convincing herself that this part of her life was over. She was thinking about Victor's question, what happens now? 3 months later, Catherine gave her notice at the cafeteria. The conservatory position hadn't worked out. She wasn't quite ready for that level of commitment. But she'd started teaching private lessons out of her apartment, slowly building a small roster of students. She'd also begun playing at a local nursing home once a week, performing for residents who appreciated music with the kind of deep understanding that came from living long, full lives. She still visited Thornwood Concert Hall sometimes, but now she bought a ticket and sat in the audience like everyone else. She still cleaned her own apartment and worried about bills and lived a life that looked, from the outside, fairly ordinary. But every day she played, sometimes for hours, sometimes for just 20 minutes before work. She played the pieces she'd loved as a student, learned new ones, improvised when the mood struck her. Her neighbors complained occasionally about the noise, but mostly they got used to it. This sound of someone reclaiming a part of themselves they'd thought was lost forever. And sometimes, late at night, she'd remember that moment on stage,